Okay, so I want to just take a to introduce you to bearings. And for a lot of you, this is probably the first time that you've seen bearings. And bearing is just a way to represent a position, or a direction, kind of like a vector, except for you don't have a magnitude to it. You just have like a direction. And bearings. Speaking of directions, bearings, you need to know your bearings, pun intended, and that's not going to get old at all. But you need to know your bearings in terms of north, south, east, west. And it's so funny because like even my own two kids, right now they're a sophomore in high school and a sixth grader, and they always say, never eat soggy waffles, and that's how they learned like north, south, east, west. And I just think it was kind of funny that they still remember that. Okay, so north, south, east, west. Okay, so one way to measure bearings is always due north, and in a clockwise direction, and that is the first method. And so I'll write this down here. So one method is to first of all measure from due north, and then in a clockwise direction. And that's a little bit different because we're so used to going counterclockwise, and we're so used to always starting here in the unit circle, which is the positive x-axis. But if you're talking about bearings, I should probably call that bearings, right? So if you're talking about bearings, and one method to describe bearings is start due north and go clockwise. So, if I said, okay, like show me a trajectory of 125-degree bearing. So 125 degrees, I would start due north, which is here, and I would open up 125 degrees in this direction. And so this ray right here would be my bearing of 125 degrees. There's a bearing of 125. Okay. What if I said, okay, now come up with a bearing of, 302 degrees. So 302, again, you're starting due north. You go 302 in a clockwise direction. So it's up here. So that would be a bearing of about 302. And again, the angle that we're looking at, that's the 302, is actually this exterior angle, right? Because it's the one that would give you the 302-degree bearing. Now, certainly, bearings could be negative. Maybe you're asking yourself. You don't usually see bearings negative. Like by definition, bearings are almost always exclusively positive. But if you said your bearing is a negative 10 degrees, it might be easier to say, okay, go due north and go in this direction 10 degrees. So that would be like a bearing of negative 10 degrees. Okay. Now, our textbook kind of builds on that idea of, well, I don't want negative, but it might be easier to say go 10 degrees in this direction as opposed to 350 degrees in that direction. So they're going to break up the bearing into first starting north or south, and then they're going to tell you how many degrees do you go towards the east or to the west. So that's the second method of expressing bearings. And what I like about that method, actually, let's go to a second method, is that it doesn't matter what direction you go, whether it's counterclockwise or clockwise, because it's going to give you the east or the west to determine that. And also what I like is that it doesn't get confusing because usually we start, like, again, on the unit circle, we usually start the positive x-axis and go in a counterclockwise direction. Our brain has been ingrained to do that. So the second method kind of doesn't even like make that confusing in terms of contradicting that the particular piece of knowledge. Okay, so the second method, you always have a direction. So there'll be a direction. It'll either be north or south. So it'll be north or south, one or the other. And then there's going to be a degree, an acute angle. So some acute angle. And there's going to be another direction over here that's going to be east or west. Okay, so there's three components to our second method. Again, you'll either start with north or south, you'll have a degree, and then you'll have east or west. Okay, for example, I could say north 40 degrees east. Okay, so how do I interpret that? So I start with the direction. I'm going to face north, and I'm going to go 40 degrees. Now, I could go 40 degrees in this direction, or I could go 40 degrees in this direction. And the direction I'm going to choose is based on that second direction, east. So start north, go 40 degrees to the east. So start north, go 40 degrees to the east. So that would be this bit, like here's no, oops, sorry. Here's north. And then 40 degrees to the east is right there. So this would be the bearing or the trajectory, or sorry, the direction or the trajectory of maybe an airplane or something like that. Okay. Another example. So let's maybe come over here. What if I said south 40 degrees east? Okay, so just change that north to a south. So again, you start with this direction here. So I'm going to go south, so point to the south. And now you're going to open up 40 degrees to the east. Remember, east is over here. So 40 degrees to the east means that's 40 degrees. And so then there it is. That direction right there would be the direction, let's say it's an airplane, or let's say it's a boat. You know, those are two very common examples that we're going to see in this section. And so like this green line would represent that direction, that vector, that trajectory. Okay. Let's do another example, just to make sure that you have your bearings on bearings. Ha! See, I told you that's not going to get old at all. Okay, so let's say we did north. Let's go 30 degrees west. Okay, so again, you start with your north or south. So there's north, and we're going to go 30 degrees to the west, which is on this side. So here would be the trajectory, or the vector, if you will, of that particular bearing. Okay, and let's go one more. Let's go this nice brown color. Yeah, let's go south. I don't know, 20 degrees to the west as well. So again, now we're going south to start with. 20 degrees to the west is in this direction. So there's the bearing, or the trajectory. Okay. Now, one final piece on just kind of on this video, like I don't know if you ever have to convert it, but let's say I was just given a plain old bearing without our north or south or east or west. Let's say I had a bearing of 200 degrees. It's a normal 200 degree bearing. And when I say normal, I probably even shouldn't use the word normal, but when I say like a 200 degree bearing with respect to north. So here's my compass: north, south, east, west, never eat soggy waffles. And if I had a 200 degree bearing, it'd be right here. Okay. But let's come up with two other ways to represent that particular trajectory. It seems that it's more like the southern hemisphere, so to speak, or the southern quadrants. So that's kind of how I would start. So one way I'd say is we'll start at the south and go this much, that acute angle, towards the west. And what is that acute angle? Well, go away, line color. I don't know why that's not going away, but that's okay. There we go. Well, if this was 200 degrees, that's actually 180, and that's 20 degrees more, which I feel like was our last example, so that's weird. So one way to represent that is start south, go 20 degrees to the west. Now, again, I don't know if it's a standard form or not, but you usually don't see this angle in the middle as obtuse. But suppose you did start with the north, and you could then say, oh, if I'm starting to the north and I still want to go towards the west in this direction, well, if this was 20, that's 70, and 70 plus 90 is 160. You could say north 160 degrees west. And again, for those people in professions who use bearings on a day-to-day basis, I'm thinking about people in anything with navigation, like whether that's airplanes, flight, like control towers or naval ships, things that would use bearing. I'm sure there's a standard. We always use, let's say, an acute angle, or we always use this particular format. But again, just to kind of get us an idea of what bearings are. Now, several of these first examples that you're going to see in the next couple of videos you're solving problems where you have to set up triangles with bearings. So you really want to be comfortable with bearings. You may want to go back, look over a few more examples just to make sure that you understand what those are. And if you have any questions, you can always feel free to email me, and we can go through that in our next discussion, or I could just email you back. Quick. So excellent. All right. So good job. We'll just keep working and go from there.